Well, hi everyone. These are certainly different times that we're living through.
Before fame and fortune came into their lives, the Fogerty brothers, John and Tom, lived through a difficult and painful childhood that shaped everything they would later become. Born and raised in El Cerrito, California, they grew up in a house that was often filled with arguments and alcohol instead of love and laughter. Their father, Galen Fogerty, was a frustrated musician who had given up on his dreams. He turned to drinking and bitterness, which made life at home unstable. John, the younger of the two, admired his father's musical abilities, but hated how alcohol controlled him. He watched as his dad's passion for music slowly turned into anger and self-destruction. Their mother, Lucille, tried to hold the family together, but even she struggled under the pressure of raising 5 boys in an unhappy marriage. She could be tough and strict, often showing love through discipline rather than comfort. When John once made too much noise practicing guitar, she smashed his amp in frustration. Later, realizing she had crushed his only source of hope, she cried and paid for the repairs. That moment showed how complicated their family truly was, filled with pain, but also a deep, if wounded, love. School wasn't much better for John. He was shy and often bullied. He once said he felt invisible, especially in a classroom where a nun humiliated him by making him wear a dunce cap in front of his peers. That humiliation stuck with him forever. Music became his only real escape, a world where he could turn pain into sound, silence into rhythm, and fear into power. Those early wounds would fuel the songs that later made Creedence Clearwater Revival one of the biggest rock bands in history. The Fogerty brothers found comfort in music together. Tom, the older brother, was the one who first dreamed of being a rock star. He started a band with his younger brother John, drummer Doug Clifford, and bassist Stu Cook. At first, Tom was the frontman. He sang lead vocals while John played guitar and quietly learned everything he could about music and sound. They were just teenagers, playing small gigs under names like the Blue Velvets and the Gollywogs. John had a deep love for rhythm and melody. He spent hours practicing and experimenting with new sounds. Slowly, the others started to notice that John had a special gift. His voice carried more emotion, his lyrics told stronger stories, and his guitar playing had a raw power that Tom's didn't. Without trying to, John began to take control of the band's direction. When they finally changed their name to Creedence Clearwater Revival, everything changed. By the late 1960s, CCR had become a household name. Songs like Bad Moon Rising, Proud Mary, Fortunate Son, and Have You Ever Seen the Rain were everywhere. John's soulful voice and unique, swamp rock sound defined the late 60s and early 70s. The band was unstoppable. 4 ordinary guys from California who sounded like they came straight from the heart of America. But behind the fame and success, cracks had already started to appear. John was taking more creative control, and while his perfectionism made the music better, it also made the relationships worse. Tom began to feel pushed aside in the very band he helped start. As their fame grew, so did the tension. John wanted the music to be perfect, while Tom wanted respect and creative input. The others, Doug and Stu, often found themselves caught in the middle. What had once been a dream built on brotherhood and music was slowly turning into a battle of pride and ego. At the height of CCR's success, John Fogerty became the driving force behind everything the band did. He wrote the songs, sang the lead vocals, produced the records, and even decided what went on album covers. Fans and critics praised John as a genius. But inside the band, that control caused bitterness. Tom felt like he was living in his younger brother's shadow. He had once been the band's leader, but now he was treated like a background player. Fantasy Records, the label that signed CCR, added fuel to the fire. The company, led by Saul Zentz, took advantage of the band's lack of business experience. Without realizing it, John had signed away the publishing rights to all his songs. It meant that every time CCR's music was played or sold, Fantasy made money, while John and the others got little. When John discovered what had happened, he was furious. He blamed everyone, especially Zantz, and later his own bandmates for not supporting him. This anger began to eat away at the group. John demanded total control to protect the music, but his leadership turned into dictatorship. Band meetings became shouting matches. Tom felt humiliated and eventually decided he couldn't take it anymore. In 1971, he quit the band. The remaining members continued for one more album, but the magic was gone. By 1972, Creedence Clearwater Revival was finished. To the world, it seemed like just another band breakup, but to John, it was personal betrayal. To Tom, it was heartbreak. 2 brothers who had started their journey together now stood on opposite sides of bitterness, unable to speak to each other without anger. What should have been the golden years of their lives became a silent war that lasted until death. After the breakup, John went into a dark place. He felt betrayed by Fantasy Records, his former bandmates, and even his brother. The company owned the rights to his songs, and every time he heard them on the radio, he was reminded that someone else was making money off his work. Out of anger, he refused to perform CCR songs for nearly 2 decades. Imagine writing some of the greatest rock songs ever and refusing to play them. That's how deep his resentment went. But it didn't stop there. Fantasy Records sued John, claiming that one of his solo songs, The Old Man Down the Road, sounded too much like CCR's Run Through the Jungle. In other words, they sued him for sounding like himself. John fought the case and eventually won, but the emotional toll was devastating. He once said it felt like being punished for being who he was. Meanwhile, his brother Tom tried to reach out. He wanted to make peace, to heal the wounds that fame had torn open. But John couldn't let go of the anger. He believed Tom had sided with Fantasy Records during the lawsuits, and that betrayal cut him deeply. The two brothers stopped speaking. The silence between them grew for years, even as both continued to make music separately. When the Rock and Roll Hall of Fame inducted CCR in 1993, the wounds were still raw. John refused to play with the surviving members, and Tom wasn't even there. He had already passed away in 1990. The silence had lasted too long. By the time John realized what he had lost, it was too late to fix it. After leaving CCR, Tom tried to build his own solo career, but it never reached the same level of success. Still, he kept recording and performing quietly, hoping to find peace outside the shadow of his brother's fame. Yet deep inside, Tom struggled with sadness and regret. He missed the days when he and John were close, when they could make music without anger or lawyers. Between them, Tom's health began to decline in the 1980s. He was diagnosed with HIV after a blood transfusion during back surgery, a tragic twist of fate that no one could have predicted. He kept his illness mostly private, continuing to record and spend time with family. In one of his last interviews, he said that despite everything, he still loved his brother and hoped they could reconcile. But that chance never came. In 1990, Tom Fogerty passed away at just 48 years old. At his funeral, John reportedly stood near his brother's casket and whispered, "We should have been together." It was a moment of realization too late. Years of pride, anger, and silence had robbed them of a relationship that had once been full of music and love. Tom's death left John broken. He later admitted that his biggest regret in life was not forgiving his brother while he had the chance. Even decades later, John spoke about Tom with pain in his voice. The success that had once united them became the very thing that tore them apart. Their story became a lesson about how fame can destroy the bonds that matter most. In the years after Tom's death, John Fogerty struggled to find peace. For a long time, he refused to even look back on the Creedence Clearwater Revival years. The memories were too painful. He felt betrayed not only by the record company, but by fate itself. When he finally returned to performing CCR songs in the late 1990s, it wasn't just about music. It was about healing. Fans who saw him perform noticed how emotional he became when singing "Have You Ever Seen the Rain?" The song, written long before the breakup, was about watching something beautiful fall apart. Many believe John wrote it about his brother, about seeing the storm clouds gather while still trying to hold on to the light. Every time he sang it afterward, it sounded like an apology he could never say out loud. In interviews, John often talked about forgiveness. He said it took him years to understand that holding on to anger only hurts the person who carries it. But even as he found peace with himself, the loss of his brother remained a scar he couldn't erase. He once said, "When Tom died, part of me died too." As time passed, John finally began performing the songs that made CCR famous again, this time with a sense of pride rather than pain. The world remembered him as a rock legend, but behind the spotlight was a man who had paid a heavy price for control and perfection. He had learned that music can make you famous, but forgiveness makes you free. After Tom's death, John Fogerty was a man haunted by his past. For years, he avoided interviews, fame, and even music itself. Every note reminded him of the pain, the betrayal, and the silence that had divided him from his brother. Fans would often ask him why he didn't just let it go, but John's wounds ran deep. He once said that every time he tried to move on, the ghosts of Creedence Clearwater Revival pulled him back. For nearly 20 years, he refused to play CCR songs in concert. That choice wasn't about stubbornness. It was about self-protection. To sing those songs meant reopening old wounds and remembering the people he had lost. During those quiet years, John tried to rebuild his life. He focused on his family, his wife Julie, and their children, who gave him something the music industry never could: unconditional love. Julie became his emotional anchor, helping him face his pain rather than run from it. In the late 1980s, John began writing again. But this time, the songs weren't about rebellion or politics. They were about healing. He poured his emotions into albums like Blue Moon Swamp, where every lyric sounded like a confession. Music had once been his weapon, then his curse. But now it was slowly becoming his therapy. Fans noticed a new gentleness in his voice, as if he had finally accepted that the past couldn't be changed, but could still be understood. As he began performing CCR songs again in the 1990s, the crowds erupted with joy. People had missed his sound, that raw, soulful, unmistakable voice that had once defined an era. When John finally sang Proud Mary again after 2 decades, it wasn't just a performance, it was forgiveness set to music. Forgiveness is never easy, especially when the pain comes from the people you once trusted the most. For John Fogerty, forgiving Fantasy Records and his bandmates was hard enough. But forgiving himself was even harder. He often spoke about how regret can be heavier than anger. "You spend your whole life fighting everyone," he once said. "And when the fight is finally over, you realize you were fighting yourself." In time, John reached a point where holding on to the past no longer made sense. The lawsuits, the bitterness, and the decades of silence had only taken away his peace. When he met with Fantasy's new owners in the early 2000s, they offered him something Saul Zaentz never had: respect. They returned some of the rights to his songs, and for the first time in decades, John began to feel free. It wasn't about money anymore. It was about reclaiming his identity as an artist who had been trapped by his own history. As he reflected on his life, John often mentioned Tom in interviews. You could hear the emotion in his voice every time he said his brother's name. He admitted that their relationship had been complicated, but deep down, he always loved Tom. He regretted not being able to say "I'm sorry" before it was too late. He said that when he played songs like "Have You Ever Seen the Rain?" or "Long as I Can See the Light," he felt as though Tom was right there beside him, listening, maybe even forgiving. The journey toward forgiveness didn't erase the pain, but it softened it. The bitterness that once defined John Fogerty slowly gave way to reflection and humility. He began to understand that fame and pride had blinded him, that in trying to protect his art, he had lost something far more precious: his brother's love. Even after all the years, the bond between John and Tom Fogerty remains one of rock music's most haunting stories. Two brothers who started with nothing, shared the same dreams, and reached the heights of fame, only to be torn apart by pride and misunderstanding. Yet the strange beauty of their story lies in how that broken relationship gave birth to timeless music. When fans listen to Fortunate Son, they hear rebellion. When they hear Who'll Stop the Rain, they feel hope in the face of chaos. But underneath every song is John's voice, shaped by pain, love, and the echo of his brother's guitar. In many ways, Tom's influence never left. His rhythm and harmony gave CCR its heartbeat, and his quiet strength balanced John's fiery ambition. Even though the world often credits John alone for CCR's sound, the truth is that Tom's presence was the emotional glue that held the band together. As John aged, he began to see that. He started including Tom's memory in his concerts, sometimes sharing old stories with fans about their early days. In those moments, it felt like he was finally keeping Tom alive through the music they both created. The songs became more than entertainment. They became a bridge between the living and the lost. In a 2020 interview, John said something that summed up his journey perfectly. "I think Tom and I are okay now. Wherever he is, I hope he knows I love him. We were kids who just wanted to play rock and roll. The rest got too loud." Those words, simple and heartfelt, carried the kind of peace that had taken him a lifetime to find. One of the hardest truths John Fogerty had to face was that his perfectionism, the same quality that made him a musical legend, also destroyed his happiness. From the beginning, John wanted everything to sound exactly right. He pushed himself and his bandmates to their limits, demanding perfection in every take, every chord, every lyric. That obsession created incredible music, but it also created resentment. Looking back, John often admitted that his need for control came from fear. Fear of failure. Fear of being taken advantage of again. Fear that if he didn't do it all himself, it wouldn't be good enough. But perfection comes at a cost. For John, that cost was his relationship with the people he cared about most. Tom wanted respect and equality, but John couldn't let go of control long enough to give it. By the time he realized what he had done, it was too late. That's the irony of John Fogerty's story. The very qualities that made him successful, discipline, vision, and